My name is Nia. I am 28 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful forensic accountant, I escaped their toxicity, but was dragged right back in when my older sister Chloe went into kidney failure. "You are letting your sister die." The scream echoed off the sterile linoleum floors, turning the heads of every single nurse and patient in the hospital waiting area. My mother Brenda did not care who was watching. She lunged forward and violently ripped the medical history clipboard right out of my hands. The heavy plastic clipboard cracked hard against my knuckles, but the physical sting was nothing compared to the absolute venom burning in her eyes. My father Derek stepped up right behind her, calling me a selfish mistake who owed my sister my life. They grabbed my arms and literally began dragging me toward the testing wing to harvest one of my kidneys. But before they could force me through the double doors, the head transplant doctor walked out holding a thick manila folder. He looked my mother dead in the eye and delivered a single sentence that made her collapse right into the waiting room chair. He said I could not donate, not because my blood type was wrong, but because a full-panel DNA test showed I had absolutely zero biological relation to anyone in this family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth and treated you like a spare part. Growing up in our affluent Atlanta suburb meant projecting an image of absolute perfection to outsiders. Our family was heavily involved in the community church, and my parents loved to flaunt their wealth. But inside our sprawling four-bedroom colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every single corner. That house was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, relegated to the cramped, unfinished basement at my mother's insistence, became my sanctuary and my prison. While my older sister Chloe was given the massive master suite upstairs and showered with expensive pageant dresses, private tutors, and endless praise, I was treated like an absolute burden. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight-A grades, joined honor societies, and eventually earned a full academic scholarship to study finance so they would not have to pay a single dime for my education. None of my achievements ever mattered. In Brenda and Derek's eyes, Chloe was the golden child, and I was simply the scapegoat born to serve her needs. That twisted dynamic never changed, not even when Chloe's lavish, reckless lifestyle finally caught up with her. At 32 years old, Chloe was in complete renal failure. Her kidneys were rapidly shutting down. It was not a genetic curse, but a direct result of years of heavy, undisclosed substance abuse that my mother had secretly funded and covered up to protect Chloe's flawless image at our church. When the doctors announced that Chloe desperately needed a living donor transplant to survive, my parents did not sit me down and ask me to get tested. They demanded it. They told me it was my duty to save the star of the family. Which brings me back to that freezing waiting room at Atlanta Medical Center. After snatching the medical consent clipboard from my bleeding hands, my mother shoved her perfectly manicured finger hard into my chest. "You are going to sign these surgical consent forms right now, Nia," she hissed. Her face flushed with unhinged rage. "I am not losing my beautiful girl because you are throwing a selfish little tantrum over a routine surgery." I took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady despite the massive adrenaline dump in my system. "I am not throwing a tantrum, Mother. I just want to speak with the surgeon alone before I agree to a major organ harvesting procedure. I have the legal right to ask questions about the long-term health risks of living with one kidney." My father, Derek, used his towering height to corner me against the edge of the reception desk, blocking my only exit. "You have absolutely no rights here," he growled, his voice dropping to a low, threatening rumble meant only for my ears. "You owe your sister this life. You have always been a selfish, ungrateful mistake, taking up space in my house, eating my food, and embarrassing us with your cold attitude. Chloe is the heart of this family. If she dies because you are too much of a coward to go under the knife, I will make sure you are utterly destroyed. You will have nothing and no one in this city." He grabbed my upper arm, his large fingers digging painfully deep into my skin, and physically started dragging me toward the restricted double doors of the testing wing. I struggled against his aggressive grip, my heart pounding fiercely in my throat. The nurses behind the reception desk looked alarmed, and one of them immediately picked up a telephone receiver, keeping her eyes locked on my father. "Let go of me right now," I demanded, planting my feet firmly on the polished floor to anchor my weight. I said, "Let go of me." Just as my father raised his other hand to forcefully yank me forward by my shoulder, the heavy wooden doors of the surgical consultation wing swung wide open. Dr. Evans, the seasoned head of the transplant department, walked out holding my thick medical file. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting from my father's violent grip on my arm to my mother's erratic, heavy breathing. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, doctor," Evans said, his voice incredibly sharp and echoing with unquestionable authority. "Let go of her arm immediately." My father dropped his hand as if he had been burned, instantly pasting on the fake charming smile he exclusively reserved for church elders and bank managers. "Dr. Evans," my father said smoothly, casually, straightening his expensive suit jacket. "We were just helping our youngest daughter find her way to the pre-op area. She is a little nervous about the donation process, but she is fully ready to save her sister." Dr. Evans did not smile back. He did not even blink. He looked down at the manila folder, his expression completely unreadable, and then he looked directly at my mother. "I need you both to take a seat," the doctor said quietly but firmly. "There will be no pre-op procedures today. In fact, there will be no surgery involving Nia at all." My mother froze, her fake smile melting into a twisted scowl. "What on earth are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Did she say something to you behind our backs? Did she lie about her medical history to get out of this? Listen to me, doctor. She is a chronic liar. She has always been a jealous, spiteful little brat who secretly wants to see her sister suffer. Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice and calm down," Dr. Evans said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Nia has not said a single word to me. I am making this medical decision based purely on the extensive blood work and genetic tissue testing we ran yesterday to check for donor compatibility." "Then what is the problem?" My father interrupted, his fake charm completely vanishing and being replaced by a dark scowl. "They are sisters. They share the same blood. Just take the kidney and do your job." Dr. Evans took a very long, deep breath and slowly adjusted his glasses. He looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as profound, devastating pity, and then he turned his full, undivided attention back to Brenda. "Nia cannot donate to Chloe," Dr. Evans said clearly, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent waiting room. "Not because her blood type is incompatible, but because the full-panel DNA test required for organ matching shows absolutely zero biological relation. Nia is not a genetic match to Chloe. Furthermore, the genetic markers clearly indicate she has zero biological relation to either of you. She is not your biological daughter." The words hung in the sterile air, like a suspended physical weight crushing the breath out of my lungs. Zero biological relation. Not your biological daughter. I felt the floor completely drop out from under me. A loud, high-pitched ringing started echoing in my ears, drowning out the ambient noise of the hospital. I looked down at my hands, at my skin, at the people I had called mother and father for 28 years of my miserable existence. Nothing made any logical sense. I was not adopted. I had seen my birth certificate 100 times. I had seen old photo albums of Brenda heavily pregnant. How could I have zero biological relation to the people who raised me? I fully expected my parents to express shock. I expected my mother to demand a recount of the labs, to cry out in confusion, or to ask the doctor how a mix-up like this was even scientifically possible. I expected normal human confusion. Instead, I saw sheer, unadulterated panic flash violently across my mother's face. Brenda's eyes widened in absolute terror, the color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and gray. Her knees literally buckled beneath her, and she collapsed heavily into the plastic waiting room chair, hyperventilating as she frantically clutched her expensive designer handbag to her chest. My father's reaction was entirely different, but equally terrifying. His face turned ashen, but his jaw locked incredibly tight. He looked at the doctor, then at me with the wild, dangerous eyes of a trapped animal. It was not the look of an innocent man who had just learned a shocking medical anomaly. It was the distinct look of a guilty man whose darkest, most criminal secret had just been forcefully dragged into the glaring fluorescent light of a hospital lobby. "Are you insane?" my mother suddenly shrieked, snapping out of her momentary paralysis. She leaped out of the chair, her high heels clicking aggressively on the tile as she charged forward. "That is a lie. That is a fabricated, disgusting lie. Mrs. Hayes, the science does not lie." Dr. Evans replied calmly, holding up the printed lab reports for her to see. "I personally ran the panel twice because the results were so definitive and unusual. There is no genetic link whatsoever. By law and by strict medical ethics, Nia cannot be considered as a familial donor, and frankly, there are serious legal implications regarding her medical proxy that we now need to discuss." "No," my mother screamed, spit literally flying from her trembling lips. She lunged directly toward me, her hands curled into tight claws. Before I could even raise my arms to defend myself, she slapped me across the face so hard my head snapped violently to the side. The sharp, echoing crack of her hand against my cheek rang through the room, prompting the nurses to immediately yell for hospital security. "You paid him off!" Brenda roared, pointing a shaking manicured finger right in my face while I tasted metallic copper blood pooling in my mouth. "You dirty, manipulative little witch! You make all that money at your fancy downtown forensic accounting firm and you used it to bribe this hospital. You bribed them to fake a DNA test so you could murder your own sister and get away with it." I stood perfectly still, the stinging heat radiating aggressively across my left cheek. I did not raise my hand to touch the red mark she had just left on my face. I did not shed a single tear. For the first time in 28 years, the heavy, disorienting fog of emotional abuse was completely lifting, replaced by the razor-sharp analytical clarity of my profession. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my entire life finding hidden truths buried in mountains of lies. And looking at the absolute terror desperately masked by rage in my mother's wild eyes, I knew Dr. Evans was telling the absolute truth. "I did not bribe anyone, Brenda," I said, my voice eerily calm, deliberately dropping the title of mother for the very first time in my life. "I am not your daughter. And judging by the guilty, panicked look on Derek's face right now, you both already knew that." The silence that followed my words was suffocating. Before my mother could draw breath to scream again, Chloe's husband Jamal stepped from the shadows. Jamal was a massive former linebacker who spent the last decade launching failed tech startups using my parents' money. Wearing a tight polo shirt he could not afford, his face was twisted in an aggressive scowl. He marched into my personal space, ignoring the hospital security guards cautiously approaching. "You are not walking out of here, Nia," he barked, his voice laced with the toxic authority he reserved for waiters. "I do not care what this doctor says. We are taking you to Emory University Hospital for a second opinion. You will get in my car right now. Chloe is my wife and I will not let her die because you want to play victim." He tightly grabbed my right arm above the elbow. His grip was bruising, triggering a defensive instinct I never knew I possessed. I did not shrink back or cry. I planted my feet and violently twisted my arm against the joint of his thumb, breaking his hold instantly. I took one step forward, looking directly into his shocked eyes. "Do not ever put your hands on me again, Jamal," I said, my voice projecting loud and clear across the silent lobby. "Let us talk about where your priorities really are. Let us talk about the credit card ending in 4309 that you maxed out last Tuesday. Or the hidden offshore account where you blew $12,000 betting on basketball this past weekend while your wife was dying in a dialysis chair." Jamal took a sudden step backward, the color completely draining from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Derek whipped his head around, staring at his precious son-in-law with a mixture of confusion and rising fury. "That is right," I continued, raising my voice, so every nurse and patient could hear. "You think because I do not come to Sunday dinner, I do not know what is going on. I am a forensic accountant, Jamal. Tracing hidden money is literally what I do for a living. I know exactly how many times you have secretly remortgaged the condo Derek bought for you. You do not care if Chloe lives. You only care that your meal ticket is expiring and you are terrified of getting a real job." Jamal looked frantically at my father, panic replacing his false bravado. Derek stepped forward, demanding to know what I was talking about, but I was already turning my back. I grabbed my purse, smoothed down my blazer, and walked straight past the security guards toward the sliding glass doors. I did not look back when my mother started hysterically sobbing, nor did I turn around when Derek loudly demanded Jamal show him his phone. The drive to my parents' sprawling estate took 45 minutes. My mind raced through financial and legal scenarios. The revelation that I was not biologically related to them explained every cold shoulder and every time I was told to be grateful. But it did not explain the how or the why. If I was not theirs, where did I come from? And why keep me around just to treat me like a disposable asset? I pulled into the massive circular driveway parking behind my mother's SUV. I punched the entry code into the mahogany front door for what I swore would be the absolute last time. The house was dead quiet. The air conditioning hummed softly, pushing the scent of expensive vanilla candles through the expansive living room. I walked past the sweeping grand staircase leading up to Chloe's massive master suite. Her room took up half the second floor. It was a shrine to her golden child status. I did not go upstairs. Instead, I opened the narrow door off the kitchen and descended the steep, uncarpeted stairs into the basement. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. My bedroom was tucked into the far corner past the water heater. It was a small, windowless space with cinder-block walls my mother refused to paint. A simple twin bed, a cheap dresser, and a single desk lamp were all I had. This dark, cramped box was where I spent my childhood studying obsessively to secure my escape. I pulled a medium duffel bag from under the bed, throwing my clothes into it. Most of my life was already at my downtown apartment, but I needed my winter coats, heavy boots, and a few irreplaceable personal documents. As I emptied the closet, I realized my duffel bag was not large enough. I needed the hard-shell suitcase I stored away years ago. I walked down the dim basement hallway, toward the unfinished crawl space. The door was heavy, sticking to the concrete floor as I shoved it open. The smell of damp earth and old cardboard hit my nose. I pulled the dangling light string, illuminating the chaotic mess of holiday decorations and stacked boxes. I spotted my dusty black suitcase wedged in the back corner directly behind an antique cedar chest that belonged to my late grandmother, Big Mama. I squeezed past heavy plastic bins and grabbed the handle of my suitcase, yanking it forward. It caught on the heavy brass latch of the cedar chest. I pulled harder, frustrated by the lack of space. The sudden force shifted the heavy chest, dragging it loudly across the uneven concrete. As the chest scraped backward, something shifted violently inside it, causing a strange, hollow thud that did not sound right. I paused, dropping my suitcase. I knew that cedar chest. Big Mama kept her prized handmade quilts in it before she passed away. It was supposed to be completely empty now. My mother banished the chest to the crawlspace because she said the antique wood did not match her modern aesthetic. I reached out, unfastened the tarnished brass latch, and pushed the heavy wooden lid open. It looked empty, but the interior depth of the chest did not physically match the exterior dimensions. As an auditor, my brain was hardwired to notice spatial and numerical discrepancies. The inside bottom panel was sitting nearly 4 inches higher than it should have been. I ran my fingers along the inside edge, pressing firmly against the smooth cedar lining. The wood gave way slightly under the pressure of my thumb. I pressed harder, wedging my fingernails into a tiny groove in the back right corner. With a sharp tug, the entire false bottom panel popped loose and lifted up. My breath caught in my throat. Lying in the hidden shallow compartment was a collection of incredibly well-preserved items. There was a faded green velvet jewelry box, a stack of yellowing bank statements bound with a rubber band, and a worn leather-bound diary I instantly recognized as Big Mama's. My hands were shaking as I reached into the hidden compartment. I picked up the leather diary, feeling the cracked spine. Tucked inside the front cover, acting as a makeshift bookmark, was a folded piece of thick, official-looking paper. I carefully pulled it out and unfolded it under the dim yellow light. It was a birth certificate. The official seal of the state of Georgia was stamped in the bottom corner. I scanned the typed ink. The date of birth matched my exact birthday. But the name printed at the top was not Nia Hayes, it was Nia Caldwell. Under the section for the parents' names, Derek and Brenda Hayes were completely absent. Instead, there was only one name listed under the mother category, Maya Caldwell. Maya Caldwell was my father Derek's wealthy estranged younger sister, who died in a horrific car accident 25 years ago. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I was not some random ungrateful orphan they picked up to torture. I was Derek's biological niece. I dropped the certificate and grabbed the diary, flipping it open to the last page where a single piece of lined notebook paper had been tucked away. It was a handwritten note penned in Big Mama's unmistakable, elegant cursive. The ink was faded, but the terrifying words were perfectly legible. I cannot carry this heavy sin to my grave anymore. The money was never meant for Derek or his greedy wife. It was meant for the baby. I know what Derek did to the brakes on Maya's car. I know he forged the adoption papers to get control of her trust fund. May God forgive me for hiding Derek's crime. I just wanted to keep the family together. But they are destroying that sweet little girl. They are using her stolen money to build a kingdom of lies. If anything happens to me, please let the truth come to light. I read the words 3 times, my brain struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. It was not just emotional abuse. It was premeditated murder. It was grand larceny. It was a massive orchestrated financial crime that robbed me of my mother, my identity, and my inheritance. All to fund the lavish lifestyle they paraded around the church. All to build the very house I was standing in. All to pamper Chloe while I was locked away in a concrete basement. I folded the birth certificate and the handwritten confession, sliding them securely into my blazer pocket. I grabbed the old diary and the hidden bank statements, shoving them deep into my purse. I did not bother grabbing my winter clothes or my suitcase. I turned around and walked out of the crawl space, leaving the heavy door wide open. As I walked up the steep stairs into the pristine kitchen, a new feeling washed over me, replacing the shock and the hurt. It was a cold, calculating focus. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my life dismantling fraudulent empires and sending arrogant criminals to federal prison. Derek and Brenda thought they could bury their crimes and use me as a spare parts donor. They had no idea they had just handed the ultimate weapon to the exact person uniquely qualified to absolutely destroy them. Sunday morning arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity that was typical for Atlanta, but the climate inside my apartment was ice cold. I knew exactly where Derek and Brenda were. It was 10 o'clock, which meant they were sitting in the second row of Greater Grace Fellowship, the massive megachurch where my father served as a senior deacon and my mother ran the prestigious women's ministry. For decades, that church was the absolute center of their social universe. It was where they flaunted their designer suits, where they established their moral superiority, and where they carefully cultivated the illusion of the perfect wealthy Christian family. Now that their captive organ donor had walked out the front door, they needed to control the narrative before the truth could leak out. I was not sitting in the pews, but I did not need to be. I had my laptop open on the kitchen island, streaming the Sunday service live. I watched the choir finish their opening hymn, and then the senior pastor stepped up to the acrylic podium. He spoke in a somber, hushed tone, asking the congregation to extend their hands in prayer for the Hayes family. That was his cue. Derek slowly walked up the carpeted steps onto the massive stage, dressed in a dark tailored suit, looking every bit the weary, heartbroken patriarch. Brenda remained in her seat, strategically dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, while leaning on Jamal's shoulder for support. The camera zoomed in tight on Derek's face. He grabbed the microphone with both hands, taking a deep, shaky breath that echoed through the massive auditorium. Church family, we are facing a trial that is testing the very limits of our faith. Derek began, his voice thick with perfectly manufactured grief. As many of you know, our beautiful Chloe is fighting for her life. Her kidneys are failing, and the doctors told us she desperately needs a living donor. A collective murmur of sympathy rolled through the 2,000 people sitting in the sanctuary. I watched the screen with a blank expression, my coffee growing cold in my mug. We thought we had a miracle. Derek continued, letting a single tear slip down his cheek right on cue. We thought the Lord had provided an answer right inside our own home. Many of you do not know this because we have always tried to treat her as our very own flesh and blood, but our youngest daughter Nia is adopted. We took her in when she was just a helpless baby with nowhere else to go. We gave her a home and education and all the love we had to offer. We thought she would step up to save the sister who loved her so dearly. He paused, bowing his head as if the emotional weight was simply too much to bear. The sanctuary was dead silent. But yesterday at the hospital, Nia turned her back on us. Derek said, his voice breaking with theatrical perfection. She refused the tests. She told us that Chloe's life was not her problem, and she walked out, leaving her sister to die. We are heartbroken. We are devastated by this ultimate betrayal of our unconditional love. I am asking you all to pray not just for Chloe's physical healing, but for Nia's troubled, ungrateful soul. The congregation erupted into audible gasps and righteous indignation. The camera panned across the crowd, showing older women shaking their heads in disgust and men crossing their arms in stern judgment. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. In less than 3 minutes, Derek had completely weaponized a community of thousands against me. He had successfully painted himself as the benevolent savior, and me as the cold-blooded monster. Before Derek even handed the microphone back to the pastor, my cell phone sitting on the counter began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then twice, then erupted into a continuous, relentless vibration that slowly slid the phone across the smooth granite surface. The fallout was immediate, and it was incredibly vicious. I picked up the device, watching the notifications flood the lock screen like a toxic waterfall. The first text was from Auntie Shirley, my mother's oldest sister. How could you be so evil after everything they did for you? You are a disgrace to this family. The next was from Deacon Vance, a man who had known me since I was in Sunday school. I always knew there was a dark spirit in you, Nia. Do not ever show your face at Greater Grace again. Then came a barrage of messages from cousins, family, friends, and members of the youth group I used to mentor. They called me selfish. They called me a demon. They told me I was dead to them. Some even went as far as tagging me in public social media posts, demanding that my accounting firm fire me for possessing such horrific moral character. In the tight-knit world of our affluent African American community, the church and the family were deeply intertwined. To be publicly denounced from the pulpit was the equivalent of absolute social exile. You were cut off from the network, from the support system, from the very fabric of the community. Derek knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to break me. He wanted the sheer weight of public hatred to crush my spirit until I came crawling back to the hospital begging for forgiveness and offering up my kidney just to stop the pain of isolation. I stared at the glowing screen, reading every single hateful word. 10 years ago, the rejection of these people would have sent me into a devastating spiral of depression. I would have cried until I could not breathe. But standing in my kitchen with Big Mama's diary sitting safely on my dining table, I did not shed a single tear. The venom in their text messages did not break me. It only fueled the cold, calculating fire burning in my chest. They were attacking a scared little girl who desperately wanted their approval. But that girl was gone. They were now dealing with a senior forensic accountant, and I was about to do what I did best. I swiped my phone into airplane mode, silencing the endless stream of vitriol, and tossed it onto the sofa. I walked straight into my home office, locking the door behind me. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and powered up my workstation. Two massive ultra-high-definition monitors flared to life, casting a blue glow across the dark room. I reached into my purse and pulled out the yellowing bank statements and the leather-bound diary I had salvaged from the hidden compartment of the cedar chest. I spread them out carefully across the glass surface of my desk. I opened Big Mama's diary to the back page, referencing the specific dates she mentioned regarding the fatal car crash of my biological mother, Maya. Then I turned my attention to the old bank statements. As a professional auditor, my daily job involved tracing millions of dollars through complex webs of offshore accounts, shell companies, and corporate fraud schemes. I was trained to look for discrepancies, for numbers that simply did not add up, and the financial reality of Derek and Brenda Hayes had never added up. I opened a secure encrypted browser and logged into my professional public records database. I typed in Derek's full legal name and his social security number, which I had memorized years ago from filling out my own financial aid forms for college. I pulled up his current property deeds, tax records, and corporate affiliations. Derek was a regional branch manager at a mid-sized commercial logistics company. It was a respectable position, but I knew the industry standards perfectly. Even with annual performance bonuses, his gross salary capped out at roughly $130,000 a year. Brenda had not worked a single day since I was brought into their home. They had zero passive income streams that they publicly claimed. Yet they lived in a sprawling custom-built estate valued at over $2.5 million. They drove a brand-new Mercedes-Benz and a Range Rover, both fully paid off. They had funded Chloe's extravagant destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas in cash. And most damning of all, they had been secretly paying tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket for Chloe's luxury rehabilitation centers, disguised as wellness retreats, whenever her substance abuse spiraled out of control. You cannot fund a millionaire lifestyle on a middle management salary without leaving a massive paper trail. I picked up the oldest bank statement from the stack I found in the chest. It was dated 25 years ago, just 3 months after Maya Caldwell died in her suspicious car accident. The statement belonged to a financial institution I immediately recognized as a high-end wealth management firm that catered exclusively to high-net-worth individuals. The account listed on the paper was not a standard checking account. It was a specialized, irrevocable trust fund. I typed the routing number and the faded account details into my tracing software, running a deep background sweep on the corporate entity linked to the trust. The progress bar loaded slowly, analyzing decades of financial restructuring. When the results finally populated across my right monitor, the sheer audacity of their crime took my breath away. 25 years ago, Maya Caldwell possessed a massive diversified investment portfolio heavily anchored in commercial real estate and high-yield tech stocks. When she died, the assets were automatically transferred into a trust meant exclusively for her only surviving heir, me. But because I was only 3 years old at the time, the state required a legal guardian to manage the trust until I turned 18. The documents glowing on my screen showed a heavily redacted court filing from a corrupt county judge granting Derek full conservatorship over the trust based on fraudulent adoption papers. But Derek did not just manage the money, he actively pillaged it. He established a shadow LLC called Horizon Holdings, acting as a shell company. Over the course of 2 decades, he had been systematically authorizing massive monthly dividend payouts from my trust fund directly into the Horizon LLC accounts, which he and Brenda controlled. They did not earn their wealth. They did not build their perfect life through hard work and Christian blessings. They built their luxury estate, they bought their cars, and they funded Chloe's entire golden child existence by bleeding my biological mother's legacy completely dry. Every time Brenda called me a burden, Every time Derek told me I was eating his food and sleeping under his roof, they were looking at the very girl whose stolen money had paid for the plates, the food, and the roof itself. I leaned back in my chair, the glowing monitors reflecting in my eyes. The smear campaign at the church was nothing but a desperate distraction. They were terrified because they knew that without me, they had no legitimate access to the remaining principal of the trust. I was not just their spare kidney, I was the actual owner of the bank. And it was time to freeze their accounts. I arrived at the towering glass and steel skyscraper of my downtown accounting firm early Monday morning as the city of Atlanta slowly woke up around me. The weekend had been a relentless blur of compiling financial ledgers, drafting emergency legal injunctions, and securing the services of a ruthless corporate attorney. I was running on black coffee and pure adrenaline, but stepping onto the marble floor of the executive suite, I felt completely untouchable. My managing partner, Richard Sterling, was already pacing near the boardroom. He respected my work ethic and treated me like a protege. He had no idea the massive storm that was about to hit our pristine corporate lobby. At exactly 10:30, my desk phone flashed red. It was Sarah, our head receptionist. Her usually calm voice was high-pitched and trembling. "Nia," she whispered frantically, "there is a man down here causing a massive scene. He pushed past the lobby concierge and is demanding to see the managing partners. He is screaming that you are a criminal." Before I could ask for a name, the heavy oak doors of the executive suite burst open. Richard walked in, looking deeply concerned, his usual stoic demeanor completely shattered by the chaos. "Nia, we have a severe situation downstairs," he said, adjusting his glasses. "A man claiming to be your brother-in-law is shouting to our clients that you embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from your family trust fund to sabotage your sister's medical treatments." I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles out of my tailored navy blue blazer. A cold smile crept across my face. Jamal had actually done it. In his arrogant desperation to intimidate me into backing down, he had walked right into the absolute worst place on earth to pick a fight about money. He thought he could use public humiliation to break me just like Derek did at the church. But this was not a church full of gullible congregants. This was a premier forensic accounting firm filled with ruthless financial investigators. I picked up my encrypted company tablet from the desk. "Richard," I said calmly, walking around my desk, "call building security and tell them to meet us by the front elevators. I am going to handle this right now." When the brushed steel elevator doors slid open on the ground floor, the sheer volume of Jamal's voice physically hit me. The lobby was a massive open-concept atrium, with floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek leather waiting chairs. Several high-net-worth clients were standing near the reception desk, clutching their briefcases, staring in absolute horror. Jamal was pacing aggressively back and forth across the polished Italian marble floor, sweating profusely into his cheap designer polo shirt. He was wildly gesturing with his thick arms, playing the role of the outraged, righteous family man. "She is a thief," he bellowed, pointing his finger at the terrified receptionist. "Nia Hayes is a fraud. She is sitting up there in her fancy office acting like a professional while my wife, her own sister, is dying in a hospital bed. She drained my wife's medical fund. She stole our family money, and I am not leaving this building until she is fired and arrested." "Jamal," I called out, my voice cutting through his hysterical rant like a frozen blade. I stepped out of the elevator bay with Richard standing firmly on my right and 3 large security guards fanning out on my left. Jamal stopped pacing and whipped his head toward me. A triumphant sneer spread across his face. He actually thought he was winning. He thought dragging my name through the mud in front of my elite colleagues would force me to surrender the trust fund access. "There she is," he shouted, taking a heavy step toward me. The security guards immediately stepped forward, placing their hands on their utility belts, but I raised my hand, signaling them to hold their ground. I wanted Jamal to speak. I wanted him to dig his own grave in front of everyone. "You think you can just freeze our accounts and walk away?" he sneered, his chest puffing out aggressively. "You think you can steal Chloe's money and leave her to die? Tell your boss what you really do, Nia. Tell him how you embezzled $500,000 from your own family." I walked slowly toward the massive interactive presentation screen mounted on the wall behind the reception desk. We used it to display market trends and welcome VIP corporate clients. I did not say a single word to Jamal. I simply plugged the synchronization cable from the wall port directly into my tablet. My screen instantly mirrored onto the massive 70-inch display, lighting up the entire lobby with a blindingly white spreadsheet. The murmurs in the lobby immediately died down as every single person turned to look at the massive rows of highly categorized financial data. I turned around and faced Jamal, who was now staring at the screen with a look of sudden, profound confusion. Embezzlement is a very serious accusation. Jamal, I said loudly, ensuring my voice carried to the executives watching from the mezzanine balcony. Since we are discussing stolen family funds in a professional financial institution, let us be entirely transparent. Let us look exactly where the money from my trust fund went. I tapped the screen, expanding the first highlighted row. In 2019, a sum of $85,000 was quietly transferred from the Horizon Holdings shell account directly into a limited liability company called Next Gen Kicks. I looked at Jamal, whose arrogant sneer was rapidly melting into sheer panic. That was your brilliant startup idea, was it not, Jamal? An app for reselling vintage sneakers that generated exactly $0 in revenue before you filed for bankruptcy 7 months later. I tapped the screen again, highlighting a massive block of red transactions. Then we have the $200,000 wired over 3 years to a commercial real estate holding company. You told Derek you were investing in a luxury car wash franchise. But according to these public tax filings, you actually used that money to cover your massive compounding losses at an illegal underground casino in Buckhead. Jamal physically stumbled backward, his eyes darting frantically around the room. The clients and staff were no longer looking at him with pity. They were looking at him with absolute disgust, whispering among themselves. Richard, my managing partner, crossed his arms, staring at Jamal like he was a cockroach on the marble floor. But wait! There is more, I continued, swiping down to the most recent transactions. You came in here screaming about Chloe's medical fund. Let us look at last month. $30,000 was withdrawn to pay for her dialysis treatments. But the money never made it to the clinic, did it? It was deposited into your personal checking account and then immediately transferred to a cryptocurrency exchange where you lost 80% of it in a margin trade within 48 hours. You did not come here because you care about Chloe. You came here because you are broke. Your credit cards are maxed out, your gambling debts are due, and the bank account you have been parasitically draining for 10 years is officially frozen by a federal judge. Jamal opened his mouth, but he was completely speechless. The booming, aggressive giant who had terrorized me in the hospital waiting room was gone. He was nothing but a pathetic, sweating fraud, stripped naked under the fluorescent lights of my domain. I unplugged my tablet and looked at the head of security. Escort this man out of the building, I commanded. If he ever steps foot on this property again, have him arrested for criminal trespassing. The security guards did not hesitate. 2 of them grabbed Jamal firmly by his arms, aggressively spinning him around and marching him toward the revolving glass doors. He did not fight back. He kept his head down, thoroughly humiliated and defeated. Richard walked up to me, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. I am so sorry you had to deal with that in our lobby, Nia, he said quietly. Do you need to take the rest of the day off to handle this family situation? I smiled faintly, sliding my tablet under my arm. No, Richard, I'm just getting started. I walked back to the elevators, feeling an incredible surge of pure, unfiltered power. I had not just defended my job. I had cemented my professional dominance. I had proven to my firm that I was cold, calculated, and completely untouchable under extreme pressure. When I returned to my quiet office, I sat down at my desk and opened my secure email server. There was an encrypted message waiting for me from the private investigator I had hired on Sunday to pull the sealed archives on Maya Caldwell. I clicked the attachment downloading the digitized police report and the coroner's file from the fatal car crash 25 years ago. I scrolled past the grisly accident photos, stopping on the official mechanical inspection report of Maya's vehicle. My blood ran completely cold as I read the highlighted text. The brake lines were not faulty. They had been intentionally and surgically severed. And the last person to log access to her vehicle at the dealership's service center the night before she died was her own brother, Derek Hayes. I was not just dealing with thieves anymore. I was dealing with a cold-blooded murderer who was currently living in a house my dead mother paid for. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and drove exactly 2 hours outside of the city limits, heading deep into the quiet, heavily wooded rural outskirts of northern Georgia. My target was a man named Arthur Vance. According to the State Bar Association archives, Arthur was the original estate attorney who drafted Maya Caldwell's trust. He had surrendered his legal license and quietly retired exactly 6 months after my biological mother died. I did not believe in coincidences. I pulled my car up to a modest brick ranch house surrounded by overgrown oak trees. The property looked incredibly isolated, perfect for a man who wanted to disappear. I walked up the cracked concrete driveway and knocked firmly on the heavy wooden door. It took nearly 2 minutes before the door creaked open, revealing a frail, elderly man with thinning white hair and thick reading glasses. He looked at me with mild annoyance until his eyes locked onto my face. The color instantly drained from his weathered cheeks. It was as if he had just seen a ghost. He took a trembling step backward, gripping the doorframe for support. "Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking with genuine terror. "No," I replied, stepping smoothly into the foyer before he could attempt to close the door. "My name is Nia. I am Maya's daughter, and you and I are going to have a very long conversation about a $5 million trust fund." Arthur collapsed into a faded floral armchair in his dusty living room, burying his face in his trembling hands. I stood over him, tossing the old bank statements and the forged birth certificate onto the coffee table right in front of him. I told him I already knew about the shell company. I told him I had the police report regarding the severed brake lines on Maya's car. I did not raise my voice or make physical threats. I simply laid out the financial and criminal evidence with the cold surgical precision of an auditor. I informed him that the FBI would be knocking on this exact door within 48 hours unless he gave me every single detail of what Derek Hayes did 25 years ago. Arthur let out a ragged, exhausted sigh. He did not try to deny anything. The guilt had clearly been eating him alive for 2 decades. "Your mother was a brilliant woman," he began, his voice shaking. "She built a massive real estate portfolio before she was 30. She knew Derek was reckless and greedy, so she explicitly wrote him out of her will. When you were born, she placed every single liquid asset and property deed into an ironclad trust fund exclusively for you. The principal was valued at just over $5 million. Derek was absolutely furious. He demanded a cut of the portfolio to pay off his mounting debts, but Maya refused to give him a single dime. 3 weeks later, she was dead in that terrible crash. I crossed my arms, feeling a sickening knot tightening in my stomach. "And then Derek came to you," I stated. Arthur nodded, wiping a tear from his eye. "I was drowning in my own gambling debts at the time. Derek knew that. He came to my office the day after the funeral. He said if he could get legal custody of you, he could petition the county court to become the financial conservator of the trust. But Big Mama, your grandmother, was already fighting for custody because she suspected Derek had tampered with Maya's car. Derek needed to bypass the standard family court investigation. He needed a closed, illegal adoption. He offered me $200,000 from the trust if I helped him forge the adoption papers and bribe a corrupt family court judge to seal the records permanently." The sheer mechanics of the betrayal echoed in the quiet, dusty room. It was one thing to see the numbers on a screen, but hearing the actual human execution of the crime was entirely different. They literally bought me like a piece of corporate property. Derek and Brenda paid off a lawyer and a judge to legally kidnap me so they could access my mother's millions. They effectively erased my true identity to secure their financial future. Once the adoption was sealed, Derek had absolute control. Arthur continued, staring blankly at the floor. He used your money to buy that massive house in Fairfield. He used it to buy his expensive luxury cars and to fund his wife's country club lifestyle. Whenever the trust generated dividends, he funneled the cash through that Horizon Holdings shell company. He told everyone he was a successful logistics manager, but he was just a parasite feeding off a dead woman's empire. He made sure you were completely isolated and emotionally broken down, so you would never have the confidence to question your origins or ask for a single dime from the family. I stood perfectly still, processing the absolute gravity of his words. Every single memory of my childhood violently shifted into a new horrifying context. When Brenda locked me in the basement, telling me I was a financial burden, she was standing inside a mansion that belonged to me. When Derek called me a selfish mistake in the hospital waiting room demanding my kidney, he was wearing a tailored suit bought with my stolen inheritance. When they paraded Chloe around the church as the perfect golden child, her entire existence was funded by my dead mother's money. I had spent 28 years believing I was the lucky charity case they had graciously rescued. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love by being the perfect student, the quiet daughter, the one who never asked for anything. But I was never a burden. I was the bank. I was the silent, unknowing vault that funded their entire fraudulent reality. They did not hate me because I was a bad daughter. They hated me because my very existence was a constant, terrifying reminder of their horrific crimes. They hated me because I was the rightful owner of the kingdom they had stolen. I was the living, breathing ghost of the sister Derek had murdered for money. Arthur slowly reached into the pocket of his faded cardigan. He pulled out a small, tarnished brass key and placed it on the coffee table next to the forged birth certificate. "I am an old man, Naya," he whispered, coughing weakly into his hand. "I have terminal lung cancer. I do not have much time left, and I am tired of carrying Derek's sins." Before I retired, I made a copy of the original meeting. The day Derek came into my office to plan the forgery, I had a voice-activated micro-cassette recorder running in my desk drawer. I kept it as an insurance policy in case Derek ever tried to pin the embezzlement entirely on me. It has remained hidden for 25 years, waiting for this exact moment. My eyes locked onto the small brass key. "Where is the tape?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "It is in a secure safety deposit box at the First National Bank downtown," Arthur replied, handing me a small slip of paper with the specific box number written on it. The recording captures everything. It has Derek explicitly offering the illegal bribe, discussing the forged adoption papers, and admitting that he desperately needed the money before Big Mama could finalize her own custody petition. "It is the absolute smoking gun you need. Take it. Give it to the authorities. Destroy him. I will happily sign whatever sworn affidavits your lawyers need. Just let me die with a clean and clear conscience." I picked up the small brass key, gripping the cold metal tightly in my palm. The final piece of the puzzle had just fallen perfectly into place. I did not offer Arthur forgiveness or sympathy. He did not deserve it. He was just another coward who had ruined my life. I simply turned around and walked out of his house, leaving him alone in the dusty silence of his own making. Driving back toward the Atlanta skyline, my mind was operating at a terrifying speed. The emotional shock had completely burned away, leaving only pure tactical execution. I picked up my phone and dialed the private number of my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring, fully expecting my call after the chaos we had uncovered over the weekend regarding the various shell company corporate structures. "Draft the final injunction," I commanded, keeping my eyes locked on the highway. "We are moving to the final phase today. I want every single asset connected to Horizon Holdings completely frozen immediately. I want the deed to the Fairfield house heavily encumbered with legal liens by the end of the business day, and I want you to prepare a federal wire fraud and grand larceny dossier for the FBI field office." We finally have the audio confession. Saturday afternoon arrived with a blistering Georgia heat, but the atmosphere in Fairfield was entirely focused on absolute luxury. Despite being in supposedly critical condition and awaiting a life-saving organ transplant, Chloe refused to let her 33rd birthday pass without a massive, highly curated celebration. It was essential for her Instagram aesthetic. She needed to play the tragic, beautiful martyr for her thousands of followers. Driving up to the estate, I could see the massive white catering tents erected in the sprawling backyard. A valet company had been hired to park the guests' luxury vehicles along the manicured street. The sheer financial audacity of throwing a $20,000 catered garden party while crying poverty to the church was staggering. But it made perfect sense. They were rushing to spend the Horizon Holdings money before they realized I was about to freeze the entire pipeline. I parked my sleek black sedan 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. I was not wearing the casual weekend attire of a family guest. I wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that screamed corporate dominance. I bypassed the valet stand, ignoring the confused shouts of the parking attendants, and walked straight through the wrought iron side gates, stepping onto the perfectly manicured lawn. The backyard was transformed into a sickeningly lavish wonderland. There were towering floral arrangements of white orchids imported from overseas, a live string quartet playing modern pop covers, and a fully staffed champagne bar serving top-shelf vintage bottles. Chloe was seated in an oversized wicker peacock chair positioned perfectly under a floral archway so she could receive her guests like royalty. She wore a flowing white silk dress, her makeup professionally contoured, to make her look delicately pale but flawless. Jamal stood behind her playing the role of the devoted protective husband. Derek and Brenda were circulating among the wealthy church elders and country club members, laughing and clinking crystal glasses as if their entire world was not about to collapse. I walked directly toward the center of the party, my heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. It took less than 30 seconds for the meticulously crafted illusion to completely shatter. Aunt Shirley, who had texted me those vile insults on Sunday, was the first to spot me. She gasped loudly, dropping her silver hors d'oeuvres fork onto a porcelain plate. The sharp clatter caused a ripple effect. Conversations died instantly. The string quartet faltered, playing a few off-pitch notes before stopping completely. 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me in absolute stunned silence. Brenda practically materialized out of thin air, stepping forcefully into my path. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, barely concealed beneath her wide-brimmed designer sun hat. "What are you doing here?" she hissed through clenched teeth, her eyes darting nervously toward the wealthy guests watching our every move. "You have absolutely no right to step foot on this property after what you did to this family on Sunday. You are not welcome here, Nia. Turn around and walk out right now before your father calls the police and has you arrested for trespassing." I looked down at Brenda, noting the slight, desperate tremble in her manicured hands. "I am not here for the finger sandwiches, Brenda," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent, humid air. "And Derek is not going to call the police. We both know he prefers to avoid law enforcement whenever possible, especially when it comes to financial matters." I stepped around her, leaving her completely speechless, and continued my deliberate march toward the extravagant head table. Chloe sat frozen in her oversized peacock chair, her perfectly glossed lips parted in shock. Jamal puffed out his chest, attempting to look intimidating, but the memory of our encounter in the lobby of my accounting firm kept his feet firmly planted on the grass. He did not dare step toward me. "Hello, Chloe," I said, stopping directly in front of her table. "Happy birthday. I see you are feeling well enough to host 200 people, while simultaneously claiming you are too weak to survive without my kidney." Chloe narrowed her eyes, her victim persona instantly slipping to reveal the vicious, spoiled brat underneath. "Get out of my sight, Nia," she snapped, gripping the armrests of her chair. "You are a disgusting, selfish monster. You came here to ruin my special day because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me, and you just want attention." "I am not here to ruin your day, Chloe. I am here to deliver a financial update," I replied smoothly. I reached into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of documents bound by a thick red rubber band. I dropped the heavy stack directly onto the pristine white tablecloth right next to her towering 4-tier fondant birthday cake. The loud thud echoed across the silent lawn, making several guests flinch. "What is that?" Jamal demanded nervously, eyeing the stack of papers, as if it were a live explosive. "Those are your premium health insurance policies," I explained, looking directly into Chloe's eyes. "The gold tier supplemental insurance that covers your private dialysis, nurses, your luxury rehabilitation retreats, your out-of-network specialists, and your private VIP suite at the hospital. I have been paying those massive premiums out of my own pocket for the last 4 years because Brenda cried and told me you would die without them. She said Jamal could not afford them because his business was struggling and the family was short on cash." Chloe stared at the papers, her confidence visibly wavering. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, looking rapidly between me and her husband. "Mom pays for my premium coverage. Mom handles all my medical bills." I let out a short, hollow laugh. "Brenda does not pay for anything, Chloe. I paid for it. Every single month I wrote the check. But as of 9 o'clock yesterday morning, those policies are officially and permanently canceled. I have formally withdrawn my financial sponsorship. You are now entirely responsible for your own out-of-pocket medical expenses. The free ride is officially over." The color completely drained from Chloe's face. The pristine white silk of her dress suddenly looked exactly like a hospital gown, as the brutal reality of my words crashed down on her. "You canceled my health insurance!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with genuine panic. "I am on the transplant list. I need daily treatments. You are literally trying to kill me. You are a murderer, Nia." I calmly reached across the catered table, picked up a chilled crystal flute of vintage champagne, and poured myself a generous glass from the open bottle sitting in the silver ice bucket. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the incredibly expensive taste. "I am not killing you, Chloe," I said, lowering the glass. "I am simply enforcing the boundary Derek established on Sunday at the church. He told the entire congregation I was no longer part of this family. Therefore, I am no longer financially obligated to fund your existence. If you need money for your private dialysis nurses, I suggest you turn around and ask your incredibly successful husband to pay for it." I gestured with the champagne flute toward Jamal. Chloe whipped her head around, looking at Jamal with desperate, pleading eyes. "Jamal, pay for it," she begged, her voice trembling with raw fear. "Tell her we do not need her dirty money. Tell her you will cover the premium right now." Jamal swallowed hard, thick beads of sweat rolling down his forehead and soaking into his collar. He looked at the towering stack of cancelled policies and then looked away, unable to meet his wife's eyes. He knew exactly what those premium policies cost. He also knew his bank accounts were entirely empty and his credit score was completely destroyed. "Jamal," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing across the silent yard, piercing the humid air. "Say something. Tell her you are paying for my treatments." "I cannot, Chloe." Jamal finally muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "I do not have that kind of liquid cash right now. My capital is tied up in long-term investments." "He is lying," I announced cheerfully, taking another sip of champagne. "He does not have any investments. He lost the last of your savings day trading cryptocurrency and paying off a massive underground gambling debt. He is completely broke, Chloe. He has been broke for years." The absolute horror on Chloe's face was a masterpiece. The golden child was finally realizing that her entire perfect life was a fragile house of cards built entirely on stolen money and my silent financial labor. She looked at Jamal with pure disgust, then at Brenda, who was aggressively pushing her way through the crowd of stunned guests toward us. "Fix this, Mom," Chloe wailed, tears completely ruining her expensive contoured makeup. "Fix it right now. Pay the premiums. Do not let her do this to me." Brenda reached the table breathing heavily, her face flushed with a terrifying mix of panic and fury. She glared at me with absolute venom. "You will reinstate those health policies immediately." "Nia," she ordered, her voice shaking with rage. "I will transfer the money to you tomorrow morning from our primary checking account. You have made your point. Now stop this embarrassing childish tantrum before you ruin your sister's day completely." I smiled, placing the half-empty champagne flute carefully back onto the pristine tablecloth. "I am afraid you cannot do that, Brenda. Your primary account is completely frozen. In fact, all of your accounts are frozen." Brenda froze mid-step, her mouth hanging slightly open. "What did you just say?" I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly on the table, leaning closely into her personal space so only she and Chloe could hear my next words. "I said your money is gone, Brenda. I know everything about Horizon Holdings. I know about the forged adoption papers you and Derek paid Arthur Vance to create. I know about the severed brake lines on Maya's car. And more importantly, the Federal Bureau of Investigation knows too." Brenda let out a sharp, terrified gasp, staggering backward as if I had just physically struck her in the chest. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with unimaginable terror. The wealthy guests surrounding us began whispering frantically, sensing that this was no longer a simple family dispute, but a massive, catastrophic criminal implosion. I straightened my posture, smoothing the lapels of my crimson blazer. "Happy birthday, Chloe," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Enjoy the fondant cake. I hear it was very expensive." I turned my back on the lavish, crumbling empire and began walking back across the manicured lawn toward the wrought iron gates. Behind me, the silence of the garden party was violently shattered by Chloe's hysterical screaming and Brenda's frantic, hyperventilating sobs. I did not look back. I had delivered the first major strike, and the financial guillotine was officially dropping. I walked out of the gates and stepped back into the blistering Georgia heat, feeling colder and more powerful than I ever had in my entire life. I had barely taken 10 steps down the pristine concrete sidewalk when the heavy wrought iron gates violently clanged shut behind me. I turned around to see Derek marching aggressively down the driveway, his face twisted into an ugly mask of unhinged fury. He had left his wealthy church friends behind, abandoning his carefully crafted patriarchal image to chase me down like a rabid dog in the street. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he roared, his deep voice echoing off the massive luxury homes lining the affluent neighborhood. "You think you can march onto my property, disrespect my wife, and leave my sick daughter crying in front of my guests? I will destroy you, Nia. You hear me? I am going to call every banking executive I know in Atlanta. I will tell them you are a pathological liar and a thief. I will completely ruin your professional reputation. I will absolutely destroy your credit score. I will make sure you never work in the financial sector in this state again. You are disowned. You are nothing to this family anymore." I stopped walking and slowly turned to face him. The blistering Georgia heat was radiating off the asphalt, but I felt nothing but ice in my veins. I looked at this towering, arrogant man who had spent 28 years making me feel small, worthless, and indebted to him. I looked at the tailored suit he bought with my dead mother's money. And for the first time in my entire life, I did not feel a single ounce of fear. Instead, I threw my head back and laughed. It was a cold, sharp laugh that completely threw him off balance. Derek blinked, his aggressive posture faltering for a fraction of a second. He was expecting tears. He was expecting me to beg for my place back in the family hierarchy. He was completely unprepared for my absolute amusement. "You are going to ruin my credit, Derek?" I asked, tilting my head, mimicking a tone of mock confusion. That is a fascinating threat coming from a man who does not even know the financial status of his own primary residence. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped, taking a menacing step forward. "My house is fully paid off. I paid it off 5 years ago." "You did?" I replied smoothly, reaching back into my designer leather tote bag. "But your beloved son-in-law had other plans." I pulled out a thick stapled packet of legal documents and slapped it hard against Derek's chest, forcing him to grab the papers before they fell to the concrete. He looked down at the documents, his brow furrowing in confusion, before his eyes locked onto the bold black text at the top of the first page. It was a notarized loan origination contract. I watched the exact moment Derek's entire reality shattered. His eyes darted rapidly across the page, absorbing the terrifying numbers. I decided to narrate the catastrophe for him, just to make sure he understood the absolute magnitude of the betrayal. 2 years ago, Jamal quietly walked into a subprime lending office in downtown Atlanta. I explained, my voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. He brought a corrupt notary with him, someone he knew from his underground gambling circles. He presented a forged power of attorney and took out a massive $300,000 second mortgage on this exact property. He forged your signature, Derek. He leveraged the equity of your perfect $2.5 million estate to cover his massive cryptocurrency losses and his sports betting debts. Derek's hands began to shake violently. The heavy legal packet rustled in his grip as he flipped to the signature page, staring at the perfect forgery of his own handwriting. Jamal has not made a single payment on that loan in 7 months. I continued, twisting the knife deeper with every word. The bank has already initiated the pre-foreclosure process. They are going to seize this house, Derek. Your perfect kingdom is completely bankrupt. You are standing on a sinking ship, and the golden child's husband is the one who drilled the hole in the bottom. A primal, guttural sound escaped Derek's throat. It was not a scream. It was the sound of a proud, arrogant man completely snapping in half. He dropped the legal packet onto the concrete, turned his back to me, and sprinted through the wrought iron gates back into the lavish backyard. I did not walk to my car. I followed him, stepping back onto the manicured grass to witness the absolute destruction of the antagonist alliance. Derek stormed straight through the crowd of wealthy church elders, shoving a waiter out of his way. Jamal was standing near the towering fondant birthday cake, holding a plate of catered food, trying to comfort a hysterically sobbing Chloe. Jamal did not even have time to react. Derek lunged forward with terrifying speed, grabbing Jamal by the collar of his cheap designer polo shirt. He lifted the massive former linebacker entirely off his feet and violently slammed him backward into the catered dessert table. The impact was deafening. Crystal champagne flutes shattered into 1,000 pieces, sending expensive vintage alcohol spraying across the white tablecloths. The massive 4-tier birthday cake toppled over, collapsing onto the grass in a ruined heap of white frosting. "You stole my house!" Derek roared, his voice cracking with homicidal rage. He drew his fist back and punched Jamal squarely in the jaw. The sickening crack of bone hitting bone echoed across the silent, horrified yard. "You forged my name, you worthless parasite! You leveraged my home!" Jamal desperately tried to defend himself, raising his arms to block Derek's relentless blows. "Wait, Derek, listen to me," Jamal pleaded, spitting blood onto the pristine white table linens. "I was going to pay it back. I had a sure thing. The tech startup was going to launch. I just needed bridge capital." "Bridge capital," Derek screamed, grabbing Jamal's throat and slamming his head back against the wooden table. "I will kill you. I will literally kill you." The party erupted into absolute chaos. Several of the male church deacons rushed forward, desperately trying to pull Derek off the bleeding son-in-law. Brenda was screaming at the top of her lungs, frantically waving her hands in the air, begging someone to call the police. But the most satisfying reaction belonged to Chloe. The golden child was sitting in her oversized peacock chair, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. She looked at Jamal, the man she had proudly flaunted on social media, the man she claimed was a brilliant entrepreneur. She realized in that exact moment that she was married to a broke, desperate criminal who had just rendered her entirely homeless. Chloe slid out of her chair, collapsing onto the wet grass. Her expensive white silk dress soaked up the spilled champagne and the dark mud. She began to sob uncontrollably, pulling at her own hair, her perfect Instagram aesthetic completely ruined. Her husband was bleeding on a shattered table. Her father was being restrained by church elders. Her mother was having a panic attack. Their wealth was gone. Their reputation was annihilated. I stood at the edge of the patio, watching the beautiful, violent karma unfold. I did not feel pity. I did not feel regret. I felt the profound, liberating peace of absolute justice. I turned my back on the screaming, fighting family, walked out of the wrought iron gates, and got into my sleek black sedan. I started the engine and drove away, leaving the Hayes family to burn in the fire they had started 25 years ago. The weekend chaos gave way to the cold, brutal reality of Monday morning. I was sitting in my corner office downtown, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. My desk was completely clear, except for my encrypted tablet and a hot cup of black coffee. At exactly 9:15, my desk phone rang. It was Elias, my lead corporate attorney. "Good morning, Nia Elias," said his voice crisp and highly professional. "I wanted to give you a live update on the Horizon Holdings injunction. The federal freeze was executed at midnight across all linked financial institutions." "Excellent," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "Have they noticed yet?" Elias let out a dry chuckle. "They noticed about 4 minutes ago. Brenda is currently trying to authorize a massive wire transfer to a private dialysis clinic to cover Chloe's out-of-pocket treatments. Her wealth management broker Harrison is on a recorded compliance line with me right now because the accounts are under a federal hold. I thought you might want to hear the reality check firsthand." "Patch me in," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "Keep me entirely on mute." A brief click echoed through the speakerphone, followed by the frantic, hyperventilating voice of Brenda. She sounded completely unhinged, her usual polished country club tone replaced by sheer primal desperation. "Listen to me, Harrison," Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and echoing as if she was pacing on speakerphone. "I do not care about technical glitches. Chloe is sitting in the waiting room of the renal clinic right now. They will not hook her up to the dialysis machine until the $50,000 monthly premium is paid in full. You need to push this wire transfer through immediately. Liquidate whatever tech stocks you have to. Just get me the cash." Mrs. Hayes Harrison replied, his voice tight and deeply uncomfortable. "As I have been trying to explain for the last 5 minutes, this is not a technical glitch. I cannot liquidate any assets. I cannot authorize a wire transfer. I cannot even move $10 from your checking account to your savings account." "Why?" Brenda screamed. "You work for me, Harrison. I am a high net worth client. You move my money when I tell you to move my money." Harrison sighed heavily, the sound of paper shuffling in the background. "You do not understand the severity of this situation, Mrs. Hayes. Your entire financial portfolio, including the Horizon Holdings LLC, the primary trust fund, the checking accounts, and the investment accounts have been seized." "Seized!" Brenda repeated the word, catching in her throat. "What do you mean, seized? By who? Did Jamal do this? Did my son-in-law steal the rest of the money?" "No," Mrs. Hayes Harrison said, his tone dropping to a grim, serious register. "The accounts were frozen by a direct mandate from a federal court judge. We received a heavily expedited injunction at midnight. Your accounts are currently under active investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service." The line went completely silent for a long, terrifying moment. The only sound was Brenda's rapid, shallow breathing. "The FBI." Brenda finally whispered, her voice trembling with unimaginable terror. "Why would the FBI freeze my money?" "Because of the plaintiff who filed the injunction," Harrison explained, reading directly from the legal summary. "The plaintiff provided the federal court with extensive, irrefutable forensic evidence of grand larceny, systemic wire fraud, illegal conservatorship manipulation, and criminal embezzlement dating back 25 years. Brenda let out a soft, pathetic whimper. "Who, Harrison? Who filed the injunction?" There was a brief pause before the broker delivered the absolute fatal blow. "The plaintiff is the sole rightful beneficiary of the original trust fund," Harrison said clearly. "Her legal name is Nia Caldwell." A sharp gasp echoed through the phone, followed immediately by the loud, clattering crash of a cell phone hitting a hardwood floor. Brenda had physically dropped the phone. Through the ambient background noise of the dropped device, I could hear Brenda wailing a haunting, agonizing scream of total defeat. She finally realized that the quiet, obedient girl she had tortured and locked in a basement for 2 decades had just legally decapitated her entire existence. Elias unmuted his line. "I think she understands the situation now," he noted calmly. "Yes, she does," I replied, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. "Let her panic for a few more hours, then send the eviction notice to the house." The relentless Georgia heat broke entirely by Tuesday evening, replaced by a violent thunderstorm that battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of my midtown high-rise apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen island nursing a cup of herbal tea and watching the city lights blur through the heavy rain. The eviction notice had been delivered to the Fairfield estate exactly 4 hours ago. I knew Derek would not simply pack his bags and accept defeat. A man who spent 2 decades building an empire of lies would inevitably try to burn the entire world down before surrendering his crown. My intuition was confirmed when the security intercom mounted on my wall buzzed with a sharp, aggressive tone. I glanced at the high-definition video feed. Derek was standing in the brightly lit hallway, right outside my heavy oak front door. My building required a biometric keycard to access the private residential elevators, but Derek had always been exceptionally skilled at charming his way past concierges and security guards. He likely spun a desperate lie about a family medical emergency to bypass the lobby desk. He was completely soaked from the rain. His expensive tailored suit was clinging to his massive frame. His tie was ripped open, and his eyes held a wild, feral desperation that I had never seen before. He raised his heavy fist and began pounding violently against the wood. The heavy thuds echoed through my quiet apartment. "Open the door, Nia," he bellowed, his voice muffled but dripping with raw malice. "I know you are in there. Open this door right now before I tear it off the hinges." I could have tapped a single button on my security panel to summon the building guards or dispatch the local police. But I did not. I wanted to see him. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who orchestrated the murder of my biological mother and watch his remaining shred of sanity completely evaporate. I set my teacup down, walked over to the entryway and unbolted the deadbolt. Before I could even reach for the handle, Derek shoved the door violently inward. It slammed against the wall with a deafening crack. He stepped into my foyer, dripping rainwater onto my polished hardwood floors, chest heaving aggressively. He kicked the door shut behind him, sealing us inside. He tried to use his towering height to physically intimidate me, stepping deep into my personal space until I could smell the stale alcohol and nervous sweat radiating off his skin. "You think you are a genius, do you not?" he hissed, pointing a thick, trembling finger inches from my face. "You think you can hack into my banking portals, file a completely fabricated federal injunction, and steal my entire life from me? You are delusional, Nia. You have lost your absolute mind, and I am going to have you committed to a psychiatric ward." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I looked up at him with a cold, hollow expression that immediately unsettled him. "You are trespassing, Derek," I said, my voice perfectly level. "And you are dripping puddle water all over my Brazilian cherry hardwood floors. Do not play games with me, you ungrateful little brat!" He roared, his face turning dangerously red. "You are going to call that corporate lawyer of yours right this second. You are going to tell him you had a mental breakdown. You are going to drop the federal injunction, you are going to release my accounts, and you are going to sign over the deed to the Fairfield house. If you do not, I swear to God, Nia, I will physically destroy you. You will not walk out of this building alive." The physical threat hung in the quiet air of my apartment. 24 hours ago, those words would have sent a chill down my spine. But now they just sounded incredibly pathetic. He was no longer the all-powerful patriarch of the Hayes family. He was a cornered rat realizing the trap had already snapped shut. I turned my back on him, entirely disregarding his threat, and walked slowly toward the center of my living room. I picked up my smartphone from the glass coffee table and connected it to my apartment's premium surround sound Bluetooth speakers. "You do not dictate terms to me anymore, Derek," I said, tapping the screen of my phone. "You lost that privilege the moment Dr. Evans read my DNA results in the hospital. You came here demanding that I release your accounts. But we both know those accounts never belong to you. They belong to Maya." Derek physically stiffened at the mention of my biological mother's name. His jaw clenched so tight, I thought his teeth would shatter. "Maya is dead," he spat out viciously. "She died in a tragic accident. I took you in out of the goodness of my heart. I saved you from growing up in the foster system." "You saved me," I echoed, a dark smile spreading across my lips. Let us see exactly how you saved me. Let me play you a song from 25 years ago, Derek. I think you will remember all the lyrics. I pressed play on the digitized audio file. The pristine acoustics of my luxury apartment were suddenly filled with the distinct analog hiss of an old microcassette tape. Then a voice crackled through the speakers. It was Arthur Vance, sounding decades younger but completely unmistakable. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Derek, the recorded voice of Arthur, asked, echoing through my living room. "This is completely irreversible. If the family court judge looks too closely at the timeline between Maya's accident and this paperwork, we are both going to federal prison." Derek stood frozen in the center of my living room, the color violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a reanimated corpse. He stared at the ceiling speakers in absolute paralyzed horror as his own younger, arrogant voice filled the room. "Relax, Arthur," the recorded younger Derek confidently replied. "The social worker is already taken care of. I handed her $50,000 in cash this morning. She is going to submit a heavily fabricated home evaluation to the court by tomorrow. The judge owes me a favor from the zoning board deal last year. He will sign the sealed adoption decree by Friday and bury the records. No one will ever know." "But what about Big Mama?" the recorded Arthur asked, his voice trembling with anxiety. "She suspects you tampered with Maya's brake lines. She is pushing for custody of the baby. Let the old woman suspect whatever she wants." The younger Derek laughed, a cold, sociopathic sound that made my skin crawl. "She has no proof. And once these adoption papers are signed, I become the sole legal conservator of the Caldwell estate. Maya is dead, Arthur. She is never coming back. That $5 million trust fund is officially mine. The baby is just the key to the vault. We keep her quiet, we keep her in the basement, and we bleed the trust dry." I paused the recording. The silence in my apartment was deafening, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing against the windows and Derek's rapid hyperventilating breaths. He stumbled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the wet hardwood. He looked at me with eyes completely wide with unadulterated terror. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "That is a fake. You fabricated that audio. You used artificial intelligence to fake my voice." I shook my head slowly, sliding the phone into the pocket of my slacks. "Do not insult my intelligence, Derek. That is a digitized copy of the original microcassette tape recorded inside Arthur Vance's office 25 years ago. Arthur kept it in a safety deposit box as his personal insurance policy, just in case you ever decided to throw him under the bus for the embezzlement. He surrendered the original tape to me yesterday morning. He also provided a fully sworn and notarized legal affidavit confirming every single detail of your massive financial crimes and your direct involvement in bribing a social worker to forge my adoption papers." Derek let out a primal, desperate growl and lunged toward me, his arms outstretched to grab my phone. I easily stepped out of his reach, sidestepping his clumsy, aggressive charge. He crashed heavily into the back of my velvet sofa, gasping for air. "You can break my phone, Derek," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You can smash it into 1,000 pieces. It does not matter. The file is backed up on 3 independent encrypted cloud servers. And more importantly, you are far too late to stop the music." Derek slowly pulled himself up over the back of the sofa, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit. "What did you do, Nia?" he demanded, his voice shaking with absolute dread. "What did you do with the tape?" "I did exactly what a forensic accountant does when they uncover a massive multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy," I replied casually, crossing my arms. I handed the evidence over to the authorities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation field office here in Atlanta received the original microcassette tape, the sworn affidavit from Arthur Vance, and a 500-page dossier of your fraudulent financial ledgers at exactly 12 o'clock noon today. Derek let out a sharp, agonizing gasp, as if I had just driven a physical knife straight into his ribs. He clutched his chest, staggering backward toward the foyer, They are not just investigating you for tax evasion anymore, Derek. I continued, stepping forward, forcing him to retreat. They are investigating you for grand larceny, federal wire fraud, criminal conspiracy to commit forgery, and the premeditated murder of Maya Caldwell. Do you honestly think a corrupt social worker is going to keep her mouth shut when federal agents threaten her with 30 years in a maximum security prison? She is going to testify against you to save herself. Arthur is already cooperating. Your shell companies are exposed. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your house is in active foreclosure. You have absolutely nowhere to run and no money to hide behind. No, Derek whimpered, tears of pure panic finally spilling over his eyelids. No, please, Naya. I am your father. I raised you. You cannot do this to me. I will go to prison for the rest of my life. You are not my father, I corrected him, my voice echoing like a final gavel strike in an empty courtroom. You are the parasite who murdered my mother and stole my future to buy yourself a luxury car. The FBI is likely drafting the federal arrest warrants right now. They are coming for you, Derek. Not next month, not next week, right now. The ultimate fight-or-flight instinct completely hijacked Derek's brain. The towering aggressive patriarch who had broken into my apartment to threaten my life was entirely gone. He was replaced by a terrified, broken coward. He let out a loud, pathetic sob, turned his back, and scrambled frantically toward the front door. His wet hands slipped repeatedly on the heavy brass doorknob before he finally yanked it open. He stumbled out into the brightly lit hallway, abandoning his pride, abandoning his threats, and sprinting desperately toward the emergency exit stairwell. I stood in the doorway watching him run for his life. Checkmate, I whispered to the empty hallway. I calmly closed the heavy oak door, engaged the deadbolt, and walked back to the kitchen to finish my herbal tea. The storm outside was still raging, but inside my apartment the air had never felt clearer. The thunderstorm raged through the night, but by Wednesday morning, the violent weather had completely cleared, leaving behind a blindingly bright sun over the Atlanta skyline. I arrived at my office early, the residual adrenaline from my confrontation with Derek still humming quietly in my veins. My corner office was immaculate and quiet. The federal injunction was actively choking the life out of the Hayes family finances, and the FBI was currently digesting the massive dossier of criminal evidence I had provided. I sat at my mahogany desk, sipping my black coffee and reviewing the morning market reports. At exactly 10:15, my desk phone blinked with an incoming priority call from Sarah at the reception desk. Nia, Sarah said, her voice hushed and laced with genuine concern. There is a woman down here asking to see you. She says her name is Chloe Hayes. Security is ready to escort her out the building, but she is crying hysterically. She looks terribly ill, Nia. She says it is a medical emergency. Send her up, I replied, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy glass door to my executive office slowly pushed open. The woman standing in the doorway looked absolutely nothing like the flawless Instagram royalty who had sneered at me from a peacock chair just 4 days ago. Chloe looked physically and spiritually ravaged. Without her premium health insurance guaranteeing her VIP private dialysis suites and expensive cosmetic treatments, the brutal reality of her kidney failure had violently caught up with her. She was wearing a baggy gray sweatsuit that swallowed her thinning frame. Her skin was sallow, her eyes were sunken with dark purple bags, and her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled into a messy, greasy knot. She was trembling, leaning heavily against the glass doorframe just to keep herself upright. Nia, she whispered, her voice cracking into a dry, pathetic rasp. Please, take a seat, Chloe, I said, gesturing to one of the modern leather guest chairs directly across from my desk. She shuffled forward, dragging her feet across the expensive carpet, and collapsed heavily into the chair. She clutched her designer handbag to her chest like a protective shield. She looked around my expansive corner office, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern art, and the massive dual-monitor workstation. For the first time in her entire life, she was looking at me not as the pathetic, adopted sister in the basement, but as a highly successful woman who held absolute power over her existence. I am so sorry. Chloe began, tears immediately spilling over her lower lashes and tracking down her pale cheeks. I am so sorry about the party. I was just stressed and scared. Jamal completely bankrupted us, and my parents are acting like absolute lunatics. Mom is locking herself in her master bedroom crying about the FBI, and Dad did not even come home last night. The clinic turned me away this morning, Nia. They told me my account was in severe arrears, and without the premium insurance policy, they will not hook me up to the dialysis machines. I feel like I am dying. Please turn the insurance back on. I will pay you back. I swear I will get a job when I am healthy again. You are my sister, Nia. You cannot let me die. I sat perfectly still, listening to her desperate, frantic plea. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. She was playing the helpless victim card because it was literally the only card she had left in her hand. I am not your sister, Chloe. I said, my voice quiet but incredibly firm, cutting through her tears. We share absolutely zero DNA. And even if we did, I would not give you another dime. You said you will pay me back. Do you have any mathematical concept of how much money you actually owe me? Chloe blinked, wiping her nose with the back of her trembling hand. What do you mean? I know the insurance is expensive, but Jamal can sell his car. My parents can take out a loan. I reached out and tapped the keyboard of my workstation, waking up the massive dual monitors on my desk. I'm not talking about the medical premiums, Chloe. I am talking about your entire existence. I turned the right monitor so it directly faced her. The screen displayed a massive, highly categorized financial spreadsheet spanning over 2 decades of forensic accounting. The rows were color-coded, highlighting hundreds of massive fraudulent withdrawals. You have spent your entire life believing you are vastly superior to me, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the cool glass of my desk. You believe Derek and Brenda worked hard to give you the best of everything while I got the scraps because I was just an ungrateful charity case. You thought you deserved the luxury while I deserved the basement. Let us look at where the money for your perfect, beautiful life actually came from. I clicked on the first highlighted section, expanding the cell data. When you turned 16, Brenda bought you a brand new Mercedes-Benz for your sweet 16 party. The sticker price was $65,000. The money was wired from a corporate shell company called Horizon Holdings. I clicked the next section, scrolling down the timeline. When you went to college out of state, you refused to take out student loans because you said you were too good for debt. Your tuition, your room and board, and your luxury off-campus apartment cost roughly $250,000 over 4 years. That money was also wired directly from the Horizon Holdings account. Chloe stared at the glowing screen, her tear-filled eyes tracking the endless rows of red numbers. Why are you showing me this? She asked, her voice shaking with confusion. My dad owned that company. He was a successful logistics manager. No, he was not. I corrected her sharply, my voice echoing in the quiet office. Horizon Holdings was a fraudulent shell company created by Derek to launder stolen money. That money belonged to a highly restricted trust fund. I scrolled down to the largest block of expenses on the ledger. Let us look at your adulthood, Chloe. Your lavish destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas cost $150,000. Then there are your 3 separate trips to luxury wellness retreats in Arizona. We both know those were not yoga retreats. They were incredibly expensive private rehabilitation centers to treat your severe prescription pill addiction. That was $240,000. All of it paid for in cash from the exact same stolen account. Chloe gripped the armrests of the leather chair, her knuckles turning stark white. Where did the money come from, Nia? She whispered, a look of genuine creeping dread washing over her sallow face. It came from a woman named Maya Caldwell, I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, unforgiving register. Maya Caldwell was a brilliant real estate investor. She was also Derek's younger sister. 25 years ago, Maya died in a horrific car crash. A crash that happened because Derek intentionally and surgically severed the brake lines on her vehicle. Chloe let out a sharp, violent gasp, physically recoiling in her chair as if she had been slapped. No, my dad is not a murderer. You are lying. You are just trying to hurt me. He murdered his own sister because he was drowning in gambling debt. I continued, completely ignoring her pathetic denial. But Maya had a daughter. She left a $5 million trust fund exclusively to her baby. Derek realized the only way to access those millions was to gain legal control of the child. So he took some of the stolen money and bribed a corrupt family court judge and a dirty social worker to forge closed adoption papers. He erased the baby's true identity, locked her in a concrete basement, and spent the next 25 years systematically bleeding her trust fund completely dry to fund his own lifestyle. I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence fill the room before I delivered the final lethal blow. I am Maya Caldwell's daughter, Chloe. I am the sole legal beneficiary of the trust fund. Every single meal you have ever eaten, every designer dress you have ever worn, every luxury car, every exotic vacation, and every single medical bill for your failing kidneys was paid for by the money your father stole from my dead mother. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Chloe sat completely frozen in the chair, staring blankly at the glowing spreadsheet. The numbers on the screen were no longer just financial data. They were the undeniable receipts of her completely stolen life. I watched the golden child completely and irreversibly fracture. The realization hit her with the destructive force of a freight train. Her superiority, her arrogance, her entire core identity as the beloved, cherished daughter of a wealthy Christian family evaporated into thin air. She was not special. She was not a princess. She was a parasite feeding off a hostage. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered, her entire body beginning to shake violently. "Oh my God, you are broke." "Chloe," I stated plainly, showing absolutely no mercy, "you do not have a rich daddy to save you. You do not have a successful entrepreneur husband to bail you out. Your parents are currently under federal investigation for grand larceny and premeditated murder. Your house is actively going into foreclosure. The money is entirely gone and the vault is permanently sealed." Chloe let out a ragged, agonizing sob. She doubled over, burying her face in her hands, weeping with a level of profound despair that was incredibly difficult to watch. It was not the theatrical, performative crying she used to manipulate Brenda to get her way. It was the raw, ugly, guttural weeping of a woman whose entire universe had just been brutally and completely annihilated. Everything she believed about herself was a lie built on the blood of my mother. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a glass of water. I simply sat behind my desk and watched her cry. "What am I supposed to do?" she sobbed heavily, looking up at me with dark mascara streaking down her pale face. "Nia, please. I am going to die. I have absolutely nothing left." "You have exactly what you earned, Chloe," I replied coldly. "You have a husband who stole from your parents, and you have a failing body that you destroyed with your own bad choices. I highly suggest you take a public bus to the nearest county hospital and throw yourself on the mercy of the state-subsidized medical program, because you will never see another single dime of my mother's money as long as you live." Chloe tried to speak, to formulate another desperate plea, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at my cold, unyielding expression and finally realized that there was absolutely no manipulation tactic left to play. Tears and guilt trips did not work on an auditor holding the receipts. I was untouchable. She slowly pushed herself up from the leather chair, her legs trembling so badly she nearly collapsed onto the carpet. She did not say another word. She turned around and shuffled slowly out of my office, looking like a hollow, empty ghost. I watched the heavy glass door swing shut behind her. The psychological destruction was complete. The parents were legally trapped. The husband was financially ruined, and the golden child was finally broken. The only thing left was the ultimate public reckoning. I closed the spreadsheet on my monitor and picked up my phone. It was time to prepare for the grand finale. I dialed the direct line to my attorney, Elias, instructing him to maintain the absolute freeze on the Horizon Holdings assets and to ignore any desperate settlement calls from Derek's legal representation. The trap was fully set, and all I had to do was wait for the final domino to fall. I spent the rest of Wednesday and the entirety of Thursday operating in a state of profound calm. The frantic energy of the weekend had entirely dissipated. For 28 years, I had existed in a state of hypervigilance, constantly anticipating the next verbal attack or emotional manipulation from my parents. Now the silence emanating from the Fairfield estate was absolute. Chloe had clearly returned home and delivered the devastating reality of my spreadsheet. They knew I had the money, they knew the FBI had the tape, and they knew their perfect kingdom was reduced to ash. But narcissists do not simply surrender. When cornered, they do not experience genuine remorse. They simply search for a new alternate reality to validate their delusion. I knew Brenda was sitting in her massive foreclosed house, desperately searching for a miracle to restore her superiority. She needed a way to prove that she was still the chosen one, that her golden child was still favored by the universe, and that I was still nothing more than a villainous mistake. That miracle arrived exactly at 2:14 on Friday afternoon. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my midtown apartment looking down at the bustling Atlanta traffic when my personal cell phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. I walked over and picked it up. It was a text message from Brenda. I had not blocked her number specifically because I needed to document her erratic behavior for the federal investigators. I expected a long, unhinged string of curses, or perhaps a pathetic, desperate plea for mercy regarding the impending FBI indictments. What I received instead was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated narcissistic delusion. The text message was a massive block of text, completely ignoring the fact that her husband was a murderer and her finances were seized. It read exactly like this. "You thought you broke us, Nia. You thought you could use your dirty stolen money to kill my beautiful daughter. But God does not let evil win. The hospital just called us." They found a perfect match for Chloe. A random, anonymous donor stepped up out of nowhere, a true Christian soul who is willing to give the gift of life without demanding anything in return. The surgery is scheduled for next week. God favors Chloe. He always has and he always will. He provided a miracle so we do not have to rely on your dirty, selfish kidney. You are dead to us. Keep the money. We have our faith and we have our daughter, and you will rot in hell alone. I read the message twice, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. The absolute sheer arrogance of her words was breathtaking. The moment the hospital offered her a single shred of hope, she instantly reverted to her true form. The terror of the FBI, the reality of her bankruptcy, the fact that her son-in-law had destroyed their credit, none of it mattered to Brenda in that exact moment. All that mattered was that she could look down on me again. She could cast me as the villain who tried to destroy them and frame herself as the righteous victim rescued by divine intervention. She actually believed the universe had magically intervened to save her golden child from the consequences of her own actions. She believed an anonymous stranger had simply materialized out of thin air to save the day. I walked away from the coffee table and moved toward my sleek, modern home office. I sat down at my glass desk and opened the heavy locked drawer on the right side. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, bound legal folder. I laid it flat on the desk, flipping past the cover page to reveal a heavily notarized, fiercely ironclad contract. I did not reply to Brenda's text. I did not need to. Her illusion of divine intervention was the final necessary component of my plan. God had absolutely nothing to do with the anonymous kidney donor. I did. 4 weeks ago, when Dr. Evans first informed me that my DNA was a complete mismatch and I could not legally donate my kidney to Chloe, I knew my family would immediately pivot to destroying my life. I knew they would attempt to smear my name at the church and sabotage my career at the accounting firm. I needed an ultimate insurance policy. I needed a way to ensure that even if they managed to circumvent my financial blockade, I still held absolute total control over the one thing they valued above everything else: Chloe's survival. As a senior forensic accountant, I had access to a vast network of clients facing extreme financial distress. I discreetly searched through my firm's pro bono debt restructuring portfolio, looking for a very specific demographic. I found a man named Julian, Julian was a 35-year-old single father who had been completely buried under a mountain of predatory medical debt after his young son required multiple emergency heart surgeries. Julian was facing immediate bankruptcy. He was about to lose his modest home, his car, and his ability to provide for his child. The collection agencies were destroying him. I also discovered through a routine medical background check required for his bankruptcy filing that Julian happened to possess the exact rare blood type and tissue markers required to be a universal living donor. I arranged a highly confidential private meeting with Julian at a neutral location. I presented him with a proposition that would permanently alter both of our lives. I offered to completely eradicate his medical debt. I offered to pay off the remaining mortgage on his house in cash and establish a fully funded college trust for his son. The total financial package was worth roughly $400,000, a fraction of the money Derek had stolen from my mother. In exchange, Julian agreed to undergo the rigorous medical testing required to become a living organ donor specifically designated for Chloe Hayes. Julian wept at the table. He agreed immediately, calling me his guardian angel. He passed every single medical screening with flying colors. But the contract we signed was not a simple donation agreement. It was a complex, highly conditional legal arrangement engineered with the ruthless precision of a corporate merger. I looked down at the signature page of the contract resting on my desk. The stipulations were explicitly clear. Julian was legally bound to remain entirely anonymous to the recipient family. The hospital was strictly prohibited from disclosing his identity. But the most critical clause in the entire 40-page document was the medical proxy designation. In exchange for the massive financial payout Julian had legally signed over his medical power of attorney regarding the transplant procedure directly to me. I was his designated proxy. That meant Julian could not be wheeled into the operating room without my explicit written authorization. It meant the surgical team could not make a single incision without my final legal consent. And most importantly, it meant I possessed the absolute unilateral power to cancel the entire organ donation at any second, up until the very moment the anesthesia was administered. Brenda was currently dancing around her foreclosed living room, praising God for a miracle. She was gloating about how she did not need my dirty, selfish kidney. She thought she had won. She thought the nightmare was over, and her golden child was going to receive a brand new lease on life, courtesy of a random benevolent stranger. She had absolutely no idea that the benevolent stranger was bought and paid for by the very daughter she had locked in a basement for 2 decades. She had no idea that the kidney currently destined for Chloe's failing body was legally owned and controlled by my forensic accounting firm. I ran my fingertips over the embossed notary seal on the contract. The grand Thanksgiving dinner was scheduled for next Thursday. It was an annual massive gathering at the Fairfield estate designed to flaunt their wealth and status to the extended family and the most prominent church elders. Brenda would undoubtedly use the holiday to publicly celebrate Chloe's miraculous donor. She would use the massive audience to formally denounce me, to paint herself as the triumphant matriarch who survived my supposed cruelty. She would set the perfect stage for her ultimate victory lap. And I was going to let her build that towering pedestal of arrogance as high as she possibly could. I was going to let her invite every single aunt, uncle, cousin, and church deacon who had texted me those vile, hateful messages. I was going to let Derek put on his tailored suit and pretend the FBI was not actively drafting his federal arrest warrant. I was going to let Chloe believe she was finally safe. And then I was going to walk right through the front doors of that stolen house and tear the entire pedestal down to the foundational bedrock. I picked up my phone, opened the text thread with Brenda, and typed a single simple sentence. I am so happy for you, Brenda. I hit send, dropped the phone onto the desk, and leaned back in my leather chair. The fake miracle was in place. The criminals were celebrating their false victory. The ultimate payoff was perfectly primed, and the Thanksgiving turkey was not going to be the only thing getting carved up next week. The following Thursday arrived with a crisp autumn chill perfectly contrasting the suffocating warmth radiating from the Fairfield estate. It was Thanksgiving Day, The massive circular driveway was absolutely packed with expensive luxury vehicles belonging to the extended family and the highest-ranking elders of Greater Grace Fellowship. Through the towering front windows, I could see the soft amber glow of the crystal chandeliers and the meticulously decorated dining hall. They had spared absolutely no expense. The catering team was carrying massive silver platters of roasted turkey glazed ham and southern side dishes into the formal dining room. Brenda was determined to host the most extravagant holiday gathering in the history of the church. She needed an audience to witness her ultimate triumph. According to the live feed from the private investigator I had parked down the street, Brenda was holding court in the center of the massive living room. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown, holding a glass of sparkling cider, and projecting her voice so every single guest could hear her. She was weaving a magnificent delusional tale about the anonymous organ donor. She loudly proclaimed to Aunt Shirley and Deacon Vance that God had personally intervened to save Chloe because their family was righteous and favored. She spun a tragic fabricated story about how I had suffered a complete mental breakdown, how I had turned my back on the Lord, and how I had maliciously attempted to sabotage Chloe's medical treatments out of pure sinful jealousy. Chloe sat nearby on a plush velvet sofa, soaking in the sympathetic coos and prayers of the church women. She looked pale but incredibly smug, believing her salvation was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Derek stood by the marble fireplace, attempting to look like the stoic, grateful patriarch. But my investigator noted that Derek was sweating profusely, repeatedly checking his watch and flinching every time a car drove past the front gates. Derek knew the FBI was hunting him. He was simply trying to survive one last holiday dinner before the inevitable collapse. He was desperately clinging to the illusion of his perfect life for a few more hours. At exactly 5:30 in the evening, just as the pastor was raising his glass to lead the 200 guests in a massive prayer of gratitude, I gave the signal. I stepped out of the back of a black armored SUV. I was wearing a razor-sharp charcoal gray tailored suit, a stark contrast to the festive holiday colors inside the house. I was not alone. Flanking me on my right was Elias, my ruthless corporate attorney, holding a thick leather briefcase. Flanking me on my left, and walking with heavy deliberate authority, were two fully armed federal marshals, wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI stamped across their backs. We did not knock. The front doors were unlocked for the catering staff. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open and stepped into the grand foyer, our shoes echoing loudly against the marble floor. The timing was cinematic. The pastor was right in the middle of blessing the feast when the heavy front doors slammed shut behind us. The sharp sound echoed through the sprawling estate. 200 heads turned simultaneously toward the entryway. The warm, joyful chatter of the holiday gathering died instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. A catering waiter dropped a silver serving spoon onto the hardwood floor, the clatter ringing out like a gunshot. Brenda froze her glass of sparkling cider, hovering halfway to her lips. The color violently drained from her face as her eyes locked onto the two federal agents standing squarely beside me. Her jaw dropped open, forming a silent scream. Derek literally stumbled backward, his shoulder crashing hard against the marble fireplace. He looked exactly like a man who was about to face a firing squad. Aunt Shirley stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Nia." She snapped, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. "How dare you show your face here today? You were explicitly banished from this family. And who are these men? You are interrupting the pastor's prayer. I am not here for the turkey." "Aunt Shirley," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the massive, silent room. "And I am not here to pray. I am here to deliver the dessert." I nodded to Elias. He walked briskly past the frozen, terrified guests toward the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the fireplace. Derek tried to step forward to stop him, but one of the federal marshals placed his hand firmly on his utility belt, giving Derek a lethal, warning glare. Derek instantly shrank back against the wall, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Elias plugged a small encrypted flash drive directly into the side of the television. The screen flashed blue for a fraction of a second before displaying a massive high-definition image of my official DNA test results. I grabbed the television remote from the coffee table and turned the volume completely off, ensuring my voice was the only sound in the room. On Sunday, Derek stood on the pulpit of your church and told you I was an ungrateful adopted daughter who refused to save her sister, I announced, pacing slowly in front of the massive screen so every guest could see the medical data. That was his first lie. Dr. Evans ran a full genetic panel. I am not adopted. I am Derek's biological niece. My mother was Maya Caldwell. She died 25 years ago. A wave of shocked gasps rippled through the older church elders, who clearly remembered Maya's tragic death. I pressed a button on the remote. The screen shifted to display the forged adoption decree next to Arthur Vance's signed legal affidavit. Derek and Brenda paid a corrupt lawyer and a social worker to forge my adoption papers. The day after my mother died, I continued raising my voice to cut through the rising murmurs of the crowd. Why? Because my mother left a $5 million trust fund exclusively to me. Derek gained illegal conservatorship over that money and spent the last 2 decades bleeding it dry. I pressed the button again. The screen exploded into the massive color-coded financial ledger, tracking 25 years of stolen money. I pointed directly at Brenda, who was now hyperventilating, clutching her chest as she leaned against the dining table for physical support. Every single thing in this house was bought with my stolen inheritance, I declared, looking directly at Deacon Vance and Aunt Shirley. The luxury cars, the designer dresses, the expensive vacations, and this lavish catered dinner you are about to eat. It was all funded by grand larceny. They are not blessed by God. They are common thieves who locked the rightful owner of this estate in a concrete basement so they could play pretend for the congregation. The reaction from the crowd was absolutely catastrophic for Brenda. The admiration and sympathy she had been bathing in just 5 minutes ago instantly mutated into pure, unadulterated disgust. Aunt Shirley looked at Brenda with wide, horrified eyes, taking a slow, deliberate step backward away from her own sister. Deacon Vance shook his head, crossing his arms in stern judgment. The illusion of the perfect Christian family was completely annihilated on an 85-inch television in front of their entire social universe. Derek Hayes and Brenda Hayes, the lead federal marshal, announced, stepping forward into the center of the room. His voice was incredibly loud and carried absolute authority. You are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, grand larceny, criminal embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit forgery. The marshals did not offer them the dignity of a quiet exit. They grabbed Derek's arms, twisting them forcefully behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Derek let out a pathetic, whimpering sob, his chin dropping to his chest in absolute, total defeat. The second marshal approached Brenda. She tried to pull away, screaming that she was a woman of God and demanding to speak to her lawyer. The marshal ignored her completely, securing the handcuffs tightly around her wrists and loudly reading them their Miranda rights in front of 200 horrified guests. Chloe sat completely paralyzed on the velvet sofa, her eyes darting frantically between her arrested parents and the financial ledger glowing on the television screen. Jamal, however, saw an opportunity. The massive former linebacker was quietly sliding along the back wall, attempting to sneak toward the kitchen exit to avoid the federal crossfire. Jamal, I called out, stopping him dead in his tracks. Where are you going? We have unfinished business. Jamal froze slowly, turning around to face me. He looked terrified, sweating through his tight dress shirt. I did not steal the trust fund, Nia, he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. That was Derek. I had nothing to do with the embezzlement. I know you did not steal the trust fund, I replied, walking smoothly toward him and reaching into my jacket pocket. You were just a parasite feeding off the parasites. But you did forge Derek's signature to take out a $300,000 second mortgage on this property, a loan you never paid back. I pulled a thick, folded legal document from my tailored jacket pocket and pressed it firmly against the center of his trembling chest without hesitation. Jamal grabbed the paper, looking down at it with wide, panicked eyes. The bank officially foreclosed on this estate at 9 o'clock this morning, I explained, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face. And because my forensic accounting firm occasionally purchases distressed real estate debt, we bought the deed from the bank. I own this house, Jamal. Jamal swallowed hard, looking frantically at the federal marshals who were currently marching Derek and Brenda toward the massive double front doors of the sprawling estate. He looked completely broken, realizing his wealthy facade had entirely vanished into thin air. That piece of paper is a legally binding immediate eviction notice, I stated clearly, my voice echoing through the silent dining hall. You, Chloe, and every single guest in this house have exactly 30 minutes to vacate my property before I have you all arrested for criminal trespassing. The sheer weight of my eviction notice hung in the silent dining room. Jamal looked at the paper as if it were radioactive. Before anyone could move, the sharp, piercing ring of a cell phone shattered the heavy silence. It was Chloe's phone. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold the device. The caller identification displayed the Central Transplant Coordinator. Chloe swiped the screen, accepting the call on speakerphone. "Hello?" she said, her voice shaking. "Please tell me you have good news about the surgery," Miss Hayes, the transplant coordinator, echoed through the room with absolute clinical finality. "I am calling to inform you that your surgical procedure has been permanently cancelled. You have been officially removed from the active recipient list." Chloe gasped, clutching her chest. "What are you talking about?" she shrieked. "My mother secured the funding. We have an anonymous donor. You cannot cancel the surgery. I will die." "The funding is not the issue," the coordinator replied coldly. "We received the results of your mandatory pre-operative blood work an hour ago. Your toxicology screening came back completely positive for heavy illicit narcotics. Our strict medical protocols explicitly state that active substance abuse instantly disqualifies a patient from receiving a donor organ. You violated the fundamental terms of the agreement. The anonymous donor organ will be reallocated to the next viable patient on the registry immediately." The line went dead. The dial tone hummed endlessly. Chloe dropped her phone. The truth of the golden child was laid bare for the entire congregation. She was not a tragic martyr favored by God. She was a deeply unstable addict who had actively destroyed her own chance at survival. The crushing stress of Jamal's secret debts, the foreclosure, and the loss of her premium health care had simply been too much for her fragile reality. Unable to cope with the collapse of her perfect world, Chloe had relapsed. She sought out the heavy narcotics that destroyed her kidneys in the first place. I looked at Brenda standing by the front doors, securely handcuffed. She was staring at Chloe, realizing the horrific, inescapable irony of her own actions. For 10 years, Brenda secretly funded Chloe's luxury rehabilitation centers. She paid off doctors and shielded Chloe from every single consequence to protect her flawless image. Brenda aggressively enabled the very addiction that just signed Chloe's death warrant. Her toxic, consuming need to maintain a perfect facade literally disqualified her daughter from receiving the life-saving organ. "It is over, Chloe," I said, completely void of emotion. "You finally played your last card." Chloe turned toward Jamal, reaching her trembling hands out. "Jamal," she begged, cracking into a pathetic whimper. "Help me, please do something." Jamal looked at his dying wife. He looked at the federal marshals securing her parents. Then he looked down at the 30-minute eviction notice. He realized he was standing in a house he no longer owned, tied to a woman about to die with absolutely zero financial assets left to plunder. He simply dropped the eviction notice onto the marble floor, turned his back on his weeping wife, and sprinted out the back doors toward the kitchen. He abandoned her on the spot, running from his gambling debts, rather than face the ruins of his marriage. "Jamal!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the silent house. "Come back!" The mass exodus began. Aunt Shirley, Deacon Vance, and the wealthy church guests moved rapidly toward the front doors, whispering in horrified, hushed tones. They wanted nothing to do with the criminal spectacle. They refused to make eye contact with Brenda or Derek, entirely abandoning the family they had praised 10 minutes earlier. The social exile Derek tried to force upon me was permanently their own reality. "Let us go," the lead federal marshal ordered, marching Derek out the front doors. The second marshal followed, pushing a hysterically sobbing Brenda down the front steps. They were shoved unceremoniously into the back of two waiting police cruisers. The flashing lights illuminated the manicured lawn, casting long, dark shadows across the property Derek stole from my mother. Chloe stumbled out the front doors following the police cruisers. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto her knees on the pristine grass. She screamed a raw, primal sound of absolute, total loss. She had lost her parents to federal prison. She had lost her husband to his cowardice. She had lost her stolen wealth, and she permanently lost her transplant. She had absolutely nothing left but the terrifying reality of her own actions. I stepped out onto the front porch, standing tall and composed. I did not comfort her. I did not gloat. I watched the flashing lights of the police cruisers disappear down the long, affluent street, taking the monsters of my childhood away forever. Elias stood beside me, acknowledging the absolute finality of our victory. I walked down the steps past the weeping broken shell of my former sister and directly toward the sleek black town car waiting at the curb. I slid into the plush leather seat, the quiet luxury shielding me from the chaotic screams echoing across the lawn. I told the driver to take me back to Midtown. As the car pulled away, I looked out the tinted window and let out a long, deep breath. For 28 years, they tried to convince me I was worthless. They built an empire to prove their superiority, entirely funded by the blood of my biological mother. But true wealth is never found in stolen trust funds or luxury cars. True wealth is the profound, unshakable peace of living entirely on your own terms. True wealth is the absolute freedom of knowing you fought for your own justice and won. My name is Nia Caldwell. I am 28 years old. I am a forensic accountant, and tonight, for the very first time in my life, I am finally going home. The most powerful lesson from Nia's journey is that your worth is never defined by those who try to diminish you. Blood does not automatically create family, and shared DNA is no excuse for abuse. For years, Nia was treated as a disposable burden, manipulated into believing she owed her abusers everything. But true strength lies in walking away from tables where respect is not served. By embracing her own power and establishing unbreakable boundaries, she proved you cannot build a life on a foundation of lies. Justice always belongs to those brave enough to stand up for their truth. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace, please hit the like button and share your story in the comments below.